Joining our conversation is Anton Fedyashin. He's an author and professor of history at American University right here in Washington, D.C. Anton, welcome to the program.
Hello, Asieh.
I want to begin with something that Sergey Lavrov also really touched on, and basically saying if United States pulls out of the Iran nuclear agreement, it sends the wrong message to DPRK. Basically, they may be thinking, why should we ever sign any potential agreement with the United States? Because they are not seen as reliable partners. Your takeaway?
Well, he makes a lot of sense, and the Europeans seem to think the exact same thing. In this issue of backing out of the agreement, the United States really is isolated. It's isolated itself, essentially. So the Iran issue and the North Korea issue are very closely related. The worst thing that the United States can do is actually to back out of the Iranian agreement. What
about his message, or I should say, really lashing out at the U.S. for destabilizing the world? I'm going to get my water here. He had some tough words for U.S. when it comes to its policy in terms of DPRK and Iran. I haven't seen Sergey Lavrov that passionate against the United States in a very long time.
Well, I think he's used the press conference as a sort of a soapbox. He doesn't get this chance very often. He's always very diplomatic and very soft-spoken. But it looks like the Russians are setting a high bar for the United States for 2018 because they know there are a lot of very important decisions coming up over the next 12 months. And so they're coming out swinging. We'll see what the U.S. will respond with.
Let me switch gears and talk about the conference in Canada, which really is supposed to be about DPRK, its repeated tests, ballistic and nuclear tests. But two major players, as we mentioned, not there. Russia and China. Can there really be progress when it comes on coming up with a strategy to diffuse the tensions without China, without Russia?
Right. So progress, no. But I think the conference is really about organizing the Western policy, a united Western policy, plus Japan, of course, towards the DPRK. But it is worth remembering and reminding the viewers that North Korea borders on 3 states only, South Korea, China, and there's a small sliver of Russian territory. And given that 2 of those players are not going to be represented, this makes the conference and its decisions highly limited, and ultimately the Russians and the Chinese will be on firmer ground if the 6-party talks really do restart, with both sides of the Korean Peninsula actually involved in trying to talk their way out of the current stalemate.
Do you expect, Anton, to any kind of substantial agreement? I mean, what is the point of this conference? What's going to come out of it?
I think the point is to hammer out a united Western position, which the United States hopes will become a lever of placing even more pressure on the North Koreans, but also on the Russians and on the Chinese. But given the range of clout that the Chinese and the Russians have in relationship to what happens in the Far East, I think the whatever the united position of the West will be, it's going to fall short, because ultimately the decision about the North Korean program will have to be made with the Chinese and the Russians involved at the same table.
And finally, I want to really ask you about the United States and the fact that it's finding itself more and more isolated on the world stage. Let's talk, whether it was the climate agreement in Paris that they withdrew, the Iran nuclear agreement, the worst deal ever that U.S. President Donald Trump has called it that. What does it mean diplomatically for the United States and its relationship with its European allies, its relationship with China and Russia? And will it damage those very critical relationships?
It will. It already has. And we've seen an unprecedented amount of disagreement between the United States and its Western allies, between Washington and Brussels and other European capitals. That's one, which will make it very difficult for the Americans to really organize a united Western front. But there's also a much bigger global issue that's going on, and that's the broad de-Westernization of global politics, with the rising power of China, of Russia, of India. India. So after 5 centuries, as Lavrov mentioned today, of Western dominance since the beginning of the age of exploration, the world that had been discovered, so to speak, back in the 14th and 1500s is now beginning to claim its right to determine the global policies on economics, trade, military development, geopolitical relations, and this is what we are living through right now. So the West is on the descendant, the other multipolar sources of power are on the ascendant, so it's fascinating to watch how this growing pains shifts and works out.
Anton, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.